I was half asleep when my phone vibrated. No sound, just that dull buzz against the mattress. I remember squinting at the screen, still smiling, still calm, until I saw the name. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. My fingers went numb. Because the name staring back at me wasn't just any name. It was the name I had never planned to give my daughter. Yet somehow, my so-called friend had rushed to claim it as her own. In that moment, I understood something chilling. This was never about inspiration. This was about control. And she had just exposed herself. If you've ever had someone smile to your face while quietly competing with your life, if you've ever felt copied, minimized, or secretly invaded by someone you trusted, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because this story isn't just about jealousy. It's about obsession, boundaries, and one of the most quietly satisfying forms of revenge you'll ever hear. I've always believed that women have intuition for a reason. That tight feeling in your chest. That subtle discomfort you can't explain. The way someone's energy feels off, even when their words sound sweet. I ignored that feeling for far too long. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I was overthinking. But looking back now, every single sign was there. We met years ago through mutual friends. Same city, same age, same social circle. She was charming in that carefully curated way, always agreeable, always laughing at the right moments, always watching. At first, I thought she was just shy. Later, I realized she was studying me. It started small. I bought a bag I loved. Suddenly, she had the exact same one. I changed my home aesthetic. A week later, her place looked like a carbon copy of mine. Same neutral tones, same furniture layout. Same accidental similarities. People joked about how alike we were, and every time they did, she would beam. I would smile too, but something inside me felt unsettled. Because it wasn't just similarity, it was replication. Everyone loves to say imitation is flattering, but what no one talks about is how invasive it feels when someone doesn't just admire your taste. They erase their own to mirror yours. Then we both got pregnant. Same year, same month. First babies. People called it destiny. I called it coincidence. At least at first. We shared cravings, nausea stories, sleepless nights. On the surface, it felt like bonding. But underneath, something shifted. Every time I posted something pregnancy-related, a nursery idea, a baby item, a book I was reading, she followed. Not inspired, not similar, identical, same brand, same color, same caption energy. And when I gently joked about it, she always brushed it off. Oh my God, that's so funny. Trends, right? But trends don't explain the timing. Trends don't explain the precision. And trends definitely don't explain the way she would watch my reactions, searching my face for approval. I tried to let it go. I told myself it was harmless. It was just stuff. Material things didn't matter. But then my mind drifted to the one thing that did matter. The one thing no one else had a right to touch. My daughter's name. Naming a child isn't casual. It's intimate. It's identity. It's something you whisper to your belly in the quiet moments. Something you imagine. Calling across a playground. I had a short list, sacred names, names filled with meaning, names I kept close to my heart. One afternoon, she asked me directly, "So, have you decided on a name yet?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. I laughed it off. I told her we were still thinking. She pressed again. Like, what? Are your options? I deflected. She pushed, I dodged, and that's when I knew. This wasn't curiosity. This was surveillance. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every interaction, every copied choice, every coincidence. And a thought crossed my mind. A dangerous, almost playful thought. What if I was right? What if this wasn't in my head at all? And what if I could prove it? So I did something that changed everything. I picked a name. A beautiful name. Convincing. Plausible. Something that sounded exactly like my style. Then, I did something very deliberate. I didn't tell her directly. I told mutual friends. Casually. Like it slipped out. I made sure the information would reach her. And then, I waited. Days passed. Then weeks. She stopped asking about names. Which should have reassured me. Instead, it made my skin crawl. Because silence from someone like her wasn't peace. It was planning. Then last week, my phone buzzed. She had given birth. I opened the announcement. I saw the photo, the baby, the caption, and there it was, the name, the fake name, the one I made up, spelled almost the same, just one letter different, as if that tiny change could mask what she'd done. I stared at my screen, frozen. And then, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I felt something snap into place. She hadn't stolen my baby's name. She had exposed her obsession. And without realizing it, she had handed me the most powerful upper hand imaginable. The strangest part wasn't the name itself. It was how calm she acted afterward, almost proud, almost relieved, like she had finally crossed some invisible finish line she'd been racing toward for years. Her messages came flooding in within hours of the birth announcement. Heart emojis, smiling faces. A casual, "Isn't it crazy how similar our tastes are?" As if that one sentence could erase months of quiet copying, weeks of pressure, and one very deliberate theft. I didn't reply right away. I couldn't. My body felt heavy, like my emotions had settled somewhere deep in my bones. I kept replaying everything in my head, every time she had asked about names, every time she had smiled a little too hard, every time she had said coincidence, like it was a magic word that could absolve her of intent. And suddenly, none of it felt subtle anymore. It felt obvious. Embarrassingly obvious. I showed my husband. I didn't say much. I just handed him my phone and watched his face change as he read the name. He looked at me, eyebrows raised, confusion mixing with disbelief. "Isn't that the name you said you weren't even using?" he asked. I nodded. Slowly. Quietly. That was the moment it stopped being just my intuition. That was the moment it became real. What hurt most wasn't that she used the name, it was that she thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that she thought I would just swallow it the way I had swallowed everything else. The copied purchases, the mirrored lifestyle, the subtle competition disguised as friendship. She underestimated me. And people like her always do. The messages from mutual friends started coming in next. At first, they were lighthearted. "Wow, what a coincidence. Didn't you mention that name once?" But underneath the jokes, I could sense confusion. Curiosity, suspicion. People were connecting dots, even if they didn't say it out loud. And she knew it. I could tell by how aggressively cheerful she became in the group chat, over-explaining, over-posting, over-performing happiness. She shared story after story. Close-ups of the baby name plaque, the hospital bracelet, the embroidered blanket. It was like she wanted to cement the name into reality before anyone could question how it got there. Like if she repeated it enough times, it would become undeniably hers. But the more she tried to own it, the more desperate she looked. I stayed, silent. That was my first real move, even if she didn't realize it yet. Silence is uncomfortable for people who crave validation. Silence leaves space for doubt to grow. And doubt, when planted at the right time, is far more powerful than confrontation. Inside, though, I was unraveling, not in an explosive way, in a quiet, internal way that felt sharper, more focused. I started noticing things I had ignored before. How she would subtly compare milestones, how she'd ask invasive questions wrapped in sweetness, how every compliment came with a side of measurement. It was never, "I'm happy for you." It was always, "We're doing the same thing, aren't we?" I realized then that this wasn't about me at all. It was about her lack of self. She didn't want my life because it was perfect. She wanted it because she didn't know how to build her own. And instead of admitting that emptiness, she tried to fill it by copying mine, piece by piece, hoping no one would notice the cracks. Few days later, she invited me over to meet the baby. The message was overly enthusiastic. Lots of exclamation points. "I can't wait for you to see her." I stared at the text for a long time. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect my peace. But another part of me knew something important. Avoidance would give her control. Presence would take it back. So I went. Her house looked exactly like I remembered, which is to say, exactly like mine. Same scent candle burning, same throw. Pillows arranged just so, same neutral baby decor I had posted about months earlier. Even the nursery felt familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. It was like walking into a distorted reflection of my own life. Close enough to recognize, different enough to feel wrong. She greeted me with a wide smile and tired eyes. She handed me the baby almost immediately, watching my face closely, waiting for a reaction. I looked down at the tiny bundle in my arms and felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Not for myself, but for this child, who would one day carry a name born not of love, but of competition. "She's beautiful," I said. And I meant it. The baby wasn't at fault. She never would be. "And the name?" she asked casually, too. Casually. "Isn't it crazy how things work out?" Her voice had that familiar lightness, but her body was tense, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. She needed my approval more than she needed air. I smiled, softly. "It suits her," I said. Nothing more. The relief on her face was immediate, almost comical. She relaxed, laughing, launching into a story about how she had just known the name was right, how it came to her, how it felt meant to be. I listened, nodding, letting her talk herself into a corner she didn't realize she was building. Because here was the truth she didn't know yet. I still had my real list. My real name. The one she never got access to. The one filled with meaning she could never replicate. And every second she spent convincing herself she had won, I was quietly preparing to reclaim something far more important than a name. On the drive home, I felt calm, centered, focused. The anger had burned off, leaving clarity behind. I realized I didn't need to expose her publicly. I didn't need to fight or accuse or create drama. Her actions would do that for me. All I had to do was live my truth, unapologetically, visibly, and without giving her any more pieces of myself to steal. That night, I placed my hand on my belly and whispered my daughter's real name for the first time out loud. It felt powerful, sacred, untouched. And in that moment, I understood something deeply satisfying. She thought she had taken something from me. But all she had done was reveal herself, and soon, everyone else would see it too. Something shifted after that visit. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough that I could feel it in the air. Conversations felt different. Messages paused a second longer before replies came through. People stopped joking about coincidences and started asking questions, in quieter ways. And the funny thing about patterns is that once you see them, you can't unsee them. Neither could anyone else. It started with small comments. One friend pulled me aside at a get-together and said, "Hey, can I ask you something?" Without it being weird. Her voice dropped, eyes darting around like she didn't want to be overheard. She asked about the name, about whether I had really mentioned it before. I didn't lie. I didn't over-explain. I just smiled and said, "It was a name I once mentioned casually. I ended up choosing something else." The truth, delivered calmly, has a way of making people uncomfortable when they're expecting drama. Others started noticing more than just the name. They noticed the nursery similarities, the identical baby gear, the way she referenced my experiences as if they were shared memories. When we felt, always we, always mirroring, always aligning herself next to me like a shadow trying to pass as substance. She, on the other hand, became increasingly tense. The confidence she'd worn after the birth started cracking. Her posts shifted tone, less celebratory, more defensive. She started explaining herself unprompted, captioning photos with long justifications. "We didn't copy anyone. We just loved this style. I know people think it's similar, but great minds think alike." When someone isn't being accused, they don't usually feel the need to defend themselves. I stayed quiet. That silence was doing more work than I ever could. I focused on my pregnancy, on my health, on nesting in my own space, a space that finally felt like mine again. I stopped posting in real time. I stopped sharing details. I gave her nothing new to latch onto. And without fresh material, she started unraveling. She reached out more often, checked in constantly, asked questions that felt disguised as concern. "How are you feeling?" quickly turned into, "What are you buying?" "Any last-minute name changes?" I answered politely, vaguely, never giving her more than surface-level responses. Each time, I could feel her frustration through the screen. People like her don't crave friendship. They crave access. The more distance I created, the louder her behavior became. At one gathering, she brought up the name again, loudly, laughing about how funny it was that people thought she copied it. She looked directly at me when she said it, searching for reassurance. I took a sip of my drink and shrugged. "People notice patterns," I said lightly. The room went quiet for just a second too long. That was all it took. Later that night, my phone buzzed with messages. "That was awkward. You handled that really well. I don't know how you stay so calm." Calm. That word kept coming up, and I realized something important. My composure wasn't just protecting me. It was highlighting her insecurity. Behind the scenes, I could tell she was spiraling. She started comparing babies online, milestones, weights, sleep schedules, subtle jabs disguised as pride. She's already doing this. We're so advanced, but every brag carried an undertone of panic. Like she needed to prove she was winning a race no one else had agreed to run. What she didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that I had already chosen my daughter's real name. A name filled with history, meaning, and intention. A name she had never heard. A name that couldn't be copied because it came from a place she would never have access to. And I had decided exactly when and how the world would hear it. As my due date approached, anticipation buzzed quietly around me. Friends asked questions, family smiled knowingly. I stayed mysterious. Not to be dramatic, but to be intentional. This wasn't about revenge in the loud, explosive sense. This was about letting the truth land naturally, with precision. The day I gave birth was calm, controlled, everything she wasn't. I held my daughter, whispered her name, and felt something settle deep inside my chest. Peace, power, ownership. When we announced her arrival, we did it simply. A photo, a short caption, her real name. The reaction was immediate. Messages poured in, compliments, love. but mixed in with the joy were questions. Wait, wasn't that other name the one you mentioned before? Oh, wow, so you didn't use that name after all? The dots connected themselves. I didn't. Have to draw the lines. She went silent. No congratulations, no emojis, no public comment. Just silence. And that silence said everything. Because now the narrative had shifted. She wasn't the one who shared a name. She was the one who rushed to claim something that was never hers. And everyone knew it. I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because she was exposed, but because I was finally free. Free from being watched, free from being mirrored, free from shrinking myself to keep someone else comfortable. I had reclaimed my space without ever raising my voice. And the best part? I hadn't even reached the real payoff yet. Her silence didn't last long. It never does with people like her. Silence feels like suffocation to someone who survives on attention and validation. Within days, I could sense the shift again. Not through messages this time, but through other people. Mutual friends started mentioning her name cautiously, like they were stepping around something fragile. She's been emotional. I think she's struggling. She feels like people are judging her. The irony almost made me smile. I hadn't said a word. Not publicly, not privately. Yet somehow she felt attacked. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Guilt has a way of turning shadows into threats. Then came the first crack. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot late one night. It was a private story she had posted, one I wasn't included in. Long text, black background, white letters. A rant disguised as vulnerability. She wrote about how women tear each other down, how people love to assume the worst, how new mothers deserve grace. She never mentioned me by name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. I read it slowly, carefully. There was anger in her words, panic, victimhood. But there was also something else, regret. Not for what she did, but for being seen. People like her don't regret actions. They regret exposure. The responses to her story weren't what she expected. Instead of blind support, she got lukewarm sympathy, polite reactions, non-committal replies. A few people didn't respond at all. That hurt her more than criticism ever could. Indifference is devastating when you're desperate to control the narrative. She reached out to me the next morning. Hey, I feel like things have been weird between us. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart was steady, calm. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was detached. And detachment is power. I replied simply. I've just been focusing on my baby and my peace. That was it. No accusations, no explanations, no reassurance. And that short sentence did more damage than any confrontation ever could, because it told her she was no longer the center of my emotional world. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, it was long. Too long. Paragraphs of justification. Explanations I never asked for. I never meant to upset you. The name just felt right. I didn't think it would be such a big deal. She kept minimizing, reframing, softening, trying to shrink my boundaries back down to something she could step over. I didn't engage. I didn't correct her version of events. I didn't defend myself. I just said, I understand you feel that way. And then I stopped replying. That's when she unraveled. She started talking. To everyone. Explaining herself before anyone even asked. Bringing up the name in conversations where it didn't belong. Laughing too loudly. Oversharing, overposting. Trying to regain control of a story that no longer belonged to her. But the more she talked, the clearer it became. The copying wasn't accidental, the pressure wasn't imagined. The pattern was undeniable. One friend admitted something that made my stomach turn. She told me that during her pregnancy she had repeatedly asked, "What is she doing? What did she choose? Do you know what name she likes?" I finally understood the full scope of it. This wasn't a momentary lapse. This was a fixation. The final blow came at a small gathering. Nothing dramatic, just a few friends, coffee, casual conversation. Someone congratulated me again on my daughter and said her name out loud. The room softened when they said it. People smiled. It fit. It felt right. Then someone else. Without malice, without intention, said, "It's funny how different it is from the other name everyone thought you were using." She froze. Not metaphorically, literally froze. Her smile locked in place. Her eyes flicked around the room. She laughed, sharp, brittle, and said, "Yeah, funny." No one laughed with her. In that silence, everything landed. The truth didn't need defending. It didn't need explanation. It just existed. And in that moment, I watched her realize that she had lost. Not because I took something from her, but because she built her identity around someone else and ended up with nothing solid of her own. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, validation, sadness. Because this wasn't a triumphant villain defeat. This was the quiet collapse of someone who never learned how to be themselves. But my sympathy didn't extend to self-sacrifice. I could acknowledge her pain without absorbing it. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I thought about how close I had come to doubting myself, to dismissing my instincts, to letting someone else define my boundaries. And I promised myself something important. I would never make myself smaller again to accommodate someone else's insecurity. She stopped reaching out after that. Slowly faded from my life. No big goodbye, no closure talk, just distance. And honestly, it was enough. Because the revenge was never about hurting her. It was about reclaiming myself. And I had done that, completely. Time did what confrontation never could. It created distance. And in that distance, clarity bloomed. Weeks passed, then months. Her name stopped coming up in conversations. Her presence faded from group chats. Invitations stopped overlapping. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't announced. It just happened. And I realized something important. When you stop feeding someone access to your life, they eventually starve, on their own. Motherhood has a way of rearranging your priorities. The things that once felt heavy start to feel irrelevant. The need to explain yourself disappears. I spent my days focused on my daughter, her laugh, her tiny fingers curling around mine, the way her name sounded when I said it softly in the dark. Every time I spoke it, I felt grounded, anchored, like I had protected something sacred without ever raising my voice. Occasionally, someone would mention her. "Have you talked lately? She seems different." I would smile politely and say, "I wish her well." And I meant it, from a distance. Because forgiveness doesn't require proximity, and peace doesn't require permission. What stayed with me wasn't anger, it was understanding. I understood now that some people don't want to hurt you. They want to be you. And when they don't know how to build their own identity, they borrow someone else's. But borrowed lives never fit properly. They itch, they crack, they eventually fall apart. I also learned the power of restraint. I could have exposed her. I could have confronted her publicly. I could have made her the villain of a dramatic story. But I didn't need to. The truth surfaced on its own, quietly, naturally. And when it did, it carried more weight than any accusation ever could. The most satisfying part wasn't watching her lose control. It was realizing I had never lost mine. I trusted my instincts. I protected my boundaries. I chose silence over chaos. And in doing so, I won something far more valuable than a name. I won my peace. Now, when I look back, I don't feel bitterness. I feel grateful. Grateful that I saw the pattern before it went further. Grateful that I learned this lesson without sacrificing something irreplaceable. Grateful that my daughter will grow up with a mother who knows how to stand firm without being loud. Some revenge stories end with explosions. Mine ended with distance. And honestly, that kind of ending lasts longer. Not everyone who smiles at you is rooting for you. Not every friend deserves access. And sometimes, the most powerful response isn't retaliation, it's removal. Iffy? This story made you feel validated. If you've ever dealt with someone who crossed invisible lines and paid the price quietly, smash that like button. Subscribe for more emotionally charged stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where silence was your strongest move? Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge is living well.